Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Jennifer Dye. I'm a librarian at Detroit Public Library. We've had a strong program with the League of Women Voters Detroit for over 2 years now. We present on issues of concern to Michigan voters about 10 months of the year. You were brought into this program muted. Please put any questions into the chat. Ruth Coolwin will capture these questions and ask them at the end of the presentation. We might be able to allow people to unmute at the end to ask questions directly, but that's if time allows. This presentation is being recorded and it will be made available on DPL's and the Detroit League's websites. Charles Thomas will briefly read the mission statement of the Detroit chapter of the League. We had a problem with the person who was planning to join us and talk about the League.
Good afternoon to you all, and thank you all for joining. It's good to see so many people in the space. Again, on behalf of the League President, Deborah Bunkley, I'm reading the League statement. The League of Women Voters of Detroit represents men and women in Detroit, Hamtramck, and Highland Park. It is about empowering voters and defending democracy. The League of Women Voters of Detroit encourages informed and active participation in government. We envision a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. Once again, thank you on behalf of the League and the library. And with that, we will go into our session. Tonight's session is on the subject of prison gerrymandering. And it is, as Jennifer has said, not a subject that all too many people are familiar with, but I want to say before we go into the session, something that we all need to understand is that prison gerrymandering affects everyone. It affects everyone. I don't want people to get lost in the title and the fact that prison is attached to it, because as you will see as we develop this conversation, that it affects communities, it affects cities, and it impacts the way power is established throughout the state. And so before we go into the introduction of the panel, I want to read a statement on behalf of Voting Access for All Coalition. And I want to say before I read the statement that Voting Access for All Coalition has been allowed this space by the Detroit Public Library and the League of Women Voters of Detroit, who do this collaborative every second Tuesday of the month. I, as a member of the League, went and kind of begged the League to allow us to have this opportunity, given the fact that this is an issue that is before the legislature right now. And so the conversation is a right now conversation. It is a right now conversation. So Voting Access for All Coalition fights disenfranchisement and systems of injustice throughout Michigan through civic engagement. We are a grassroots organization committed to helping people directly impacted by the legal system find their voice and sense of belonging and leadership to transform Michigan through the power of voting. Born during the pandemic, there was and still is a need to reach the community. We believe the returning neighbors are best able to inform and inspire others who have been through the criminal legal system, that they matter, their voices matter, and that their participation in voting matters by continuing to organize, mobilize, and ensure that every Michigander in pretrial situations, individuals about to be released from prison, and those formerly incarcerated have the opportunity and knowledge they need to exercise their right to vote in every election. We aim to reach, inform, and inspire our communities to recognize the potential collective impact of being able to choose judges, prosecutors, sheriffs, city council members, legislators, and other elected officials. In Michigan, yes, you can vote, even if you are awaiting arraignment. You can vote if you're charged with a felony but not convicted. You can vote if you're newly released from jail or prison, on parole or probation, or in the process of appealing a conviction. Once again, that is the statement for Voting Access for All Coalition, and we thank the League of Women Voters of Detroit and the Detroit Public Library for allowing us this time to discuss this very important issue. With that, I'm going to give an opportunity for all of the panelists to introduce themselves. I'll call them one by name, and they can introduce themselves, say a little bit about the organization or organizations that they are a part of and some of the work that they are involved. And I'm going to start with Dee Dee Taylor.
Thank you, Charles. My name is Dee Dee Taylor, and I am the president and founder of Tailor-Made Reentry. And what Tailor-Made Reentry is about is bridging the gaps between community law enforcement and those impacted by the criminal justice system. And the reason why this is so passionate for me is because I'm actually a victim of police brutality. My sister is Breonna Taylor, and I also have a father who have served 26 years and currently serving jail time, but was sentenced at 16 years old. So that's a little about me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee Dee. Anthony Boyd.
Thanks, Charles. My name is Anthony Boyd. I'm here representing Hero Reentry Consulting and Coaching. I also work with a few other organizations, Michigan Liberation, Designing Justice, Designing Spaces Back. And this topic of discussion is very near and dear to my heart because I've experienced it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Nicholas Buckingham.
Yeah, what up, everybody? My name is Nicholas DeFell Buckingham. I use the pronouns he, him, co-founder and campaign director for Michigan Liberation. We're a statewide 501c4, also a C3, just thought it's important to say the C4. Organization that focus on leadership development for formerly incarcerated, directly impacted folks, also running progressive campaigns with the communities to hold prosecutors, local judges, and Supreme Court judges accountable to reducing the numbers of incarcerated bodies in our system in Michigan.
Thank you, Nicholas. Kim Murphy Kovalik.
Thank you, Charles. I'm Kim Murphy Kovalik. I'm the advocacy director at Voters Not Politicians. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit, statewide organization that mobilizes people in Michigan to enact structural democracy change. And we are the organization that in 2018 ended gerrymandering in the state of Michigan, but not prison gerrymandering.
Thank you, Kim. Alex Castura.
Thanks, Charles. My name is Alex Castura. I'm the legal director at the Prison Policy Initiative. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit, national organization doing research and policy and sparking advocacy to end mass criminalization in the US. As part of that, I focus on prison gerrymandering across the country.
Thank you, Alex. We also are expecting Rep. Stephanie Young. I'm not sure if she's on or anyone from her office is on and available. One other panelist that we are expecting, Tony Gant. I'm not sure if he's on just yet, but he will be on and part of the panel as we go along. With that, I want to say that we are going to gather a lot of information from this panel. This panel has been put together with people who, as they've already expressed, have been in this work for a long time. Very powerful people in this space. And so what I'm going to do is I have some questions that we have prepared, but we are also inviting everyone, if you have any questions now or as we go along, if you would put them into the chat, because we want everybody to walk away from this space well-informed on the issue of prison gerrymandering. And so I'm going to go ahead and begin our questions, and they will be directed to individuals on the panel, but I'm also going to invite the other panelists. If there is something that you would like to share in addition to what the person presents that is posed the question, feel free to do so. The good news is that we're running a little bit ahead of time, so we're going to afford about 5 minutes per question to make sure that we have time for anyone in the audience to pose their questions. And so the first question that I want to present, and this question will be presented to Kim. And the question is, what is gerrymandering and what is the difference between gerrymandering and prison gerrymandering?
I'm glad we have 5 minutes. It's hard to be concise when you're describing gerrymandering. But simply put, it's the practice of drawing political districts to give one political party an advantage over another. Every 10 years, we all participate in the census, and we do this because the population is always changing. People move, die, and are born every day. So our political districts need to be rebalanced to ensure that they have a nearly equal number of people. The senators, representatives, and congresspeople that we choose to represent us based on those districts, they represent us in Lansing and in Washington, D.C., and they're tasked with passing laws, allocating money to programs, and making important decisions about policies from healthcare to clean water to energy conservation and everything in between. They represent the people in their unique district and ultimately are answerable to them. I live in Genesee County, and we have panelists and attendees from diverse parts of Michigan here tonight, but we all have equal representation in Lansing and DC because the district maps are rebalanced every decade. In just this past cycle, 2022, Michigan began forming an independent commission every 10 years to redraw our state legislative and US congressional maps. There are a number of constitutional rules that are now in place that the commission must follow to ensure that the maps are fair and that they do not give advantage to any party. In the census process, we record the number of people living in every place in the state to ensure our constitutional right to equal representation. And we record them where they live. It's precise. But people who are incarcerated for any amount of time are counted in the prison or jail in which they're being held rather than at their home address. This census miscount leads to skewed districts and unequitable representation. It makes districts in which there is a prison or jail appear more populated, while simultaneously undercounting the communities at which the people being held in those prisons and jails actually live.
Thank you, Kim. And again, I want everyone to listen very intently or intensely in what is being expressed here, because again, as you hear the expression about these counts and these citizens being counted outside of their actual living space, then you see this skew in power. And so again, thank you, Kim, for that answer. My next question is going to get into some of the personal harms that are done when it comes to drawing these maps. And I have to be honest, as I present this question, and I'm going to present it to Dee Taylor and Anthony Boyd in that order. I'm hoping that you all will speak to this, but I have to admit before I ask the question that it is something that I never thought about. I never thought about the personal impacts on people when it comes to the map drawing. And so the question is, what is the impact of gerrymandering on Michigan personally? Dee, please answer with any data you can provide. And data aside, I want you to just express to us more than the data, the personal impact that it has had on you when it comes to prison gerrymandering.
Yes. So for me, this is very near and dear to my heart because, as Charles mentioned, this is a very personal experience. This is almost my life and who I've become. And so, as I mentioned, my dad was sentenced to life in prison at 16 years old, and he had a consecutive charge. So I tell people I grew up with him in jail. I literally can show you a picture of him and I at 5 years old behind bars to now 30 years old, and he's currently still behind bars. And so in this experience, my dad has been all over Michigan and out of state as well. And at one point in my life, which was probably the worst point in my life, my dad was up north in the UP. And anybody know that it's really hard to go up there, travel up there, and then have to stay the night and all of the above. Not to mention, if it's snowing, you can't get up there at all. And so that is one way that gerrymandering have affected me and my family. There has been years that I haven't been able to see my job due to my dad being misplaced in an entirely new county with different rules, different regulations. And not only was it just me, it's also my 6 siblings as well, including Breonna Taylor. So just like I haven't had a personal life experience before Breonna passed away, she literally had the same experience, and it affected us the most when she passed away, honestly. My dad was not given the opportunity to come to the funeral due to gerrymandering. So not only have we seen each other while my dad has been behind bars, but my dad last memory of his child is absent as well due to gerrymandering. And so again, this has been something that really has affected my family in many ways. And just my story in itself shows why family members should be closer to home. This also not only affect families, but the economy as well. And so, yeah, that's a little of why this is valuable to me and why it should be eliminated. I need my father closer, and it would be nice for him to stay close to me.
Thank you, Dee Dee. And that just speaks to why we have to address this, not just from the question of the maps themselves, but there is an intentionality when it comes to where these facilities are placed. And these facilities are placed in municipalities in order to supplement their economy, but at the same time doing extreme damage to families by housing citizens in locations where they become out of reach when it comes to their family connections. And so we got to hear it from that side from Dee Dee. Anthony, I want you to take the same question and give it to us from your side.
Appreciate it, Charles. Dee Dee, listening to you just brought back so many memories about my time being spent. It's funny that you say up north, because we either call it up north or across the bridge. And only people who've been there or have experienced it understand that. But my time, one of the things that was problematic for me being across the bridge is that the whole time I was there, the 3 or 4 years I was across the bridge, I never saw my family because they couldn't make it up there. They couldn't financially afford it. So it didn't allow me to see my children. I have 6 daughters, and me being incarcerated for 23 years, the only relationship we had was either through mail or visits. And when I couldn't see them, that really damaged the relationship. Even though it was for 3 or 4 years, once I got out, it was hard to repair that relationship. And we're still working on it to this very day. And like I said before, being up there really affected my family emotionally, financially. I lost my mom when I was up there, and they wouldn't allow me to even go see her. They wouldn't allow me to attend the funeral, even though if your family is willing to pay for it and they can find at least 2 guards to take you to the funeral, normally you're allowed to go, but they wouldn't even allow me to go because I was up north. And that was really, really frustrating. So that left a void in me because I didn't get a chance to ever say goodbye to my mom. Again, the whole time I was up there as well, you know, phone calls are different, especially depending upon where you go. There's a place called Ojibwe that when you're up there, you're like 5 miles away from Wisconsin, I think. So the time, not only is the time frame different, but the amount of money being spent to call is different. And it's extremely expensive. So my family couldn't afford much of that. Couldn't afford any of it, really, not while I was up there. And it just made it, that time up there made it extremely difficult to maintain a relationship with my mother when she was alive, because these were the people that were coming to visit me when I was closer to home. And last but not least, what I couldn't understand was I lived in Detroit. You had two facilities in Detroit at the time, that you had Mound and Ryan. I stayed on the west side, so I could, to me, it would have just seemed like the right thing to do and more cost effective to keep me here in the city, but they sent me up north, and where I stayed again for quite some time. And that made absolutely no sense to me.
Thank you, Anthony. And, as I hear this, I just hear an additional harm that's placed on individuals. I mean, they're already harmed, some of them unjustly by the system, but then to place this additional harm on citizens, well, I won't label it. I'll just leave it as been stated. Thank you both. The next question I'm going to ask to Nick. Nick, if you could help us out. What areas are hardest hit by this issue of prison gerrymandering?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, shout out to everybody that just shared the story of impact, either around incarceration or prison gerrymandering. I think when we look at data that's coming from Michigan, I think there's a few things that we can point out, right? One, we know that there's like a huge influx of folks that are currently incarcerated, and not just like currently, but throughout their history. A huge influx of folks that come from Wayne County, right? Two, there's a statistic that, somewhere it says, and I believe it's still kind of accurate today, roughly between 5,000 to 7,000 people are returning home every single day to the city of Detroit, or more broadly to Wayne County. And I think when we talk about prison gerrymandering and what are the areas that are mostly impacted, to know that, we have this amount of people that are coming from one centralized area, however, are not being counted within the census for that area to really get the resources to best fit that community, right? And so you would think, like, coming into Detroit or coming into Wayne County, if we have a mass incarceration problem, especially among Black people here in this county, that we would have the resources to really help with, reentry or help with individuals that are coming in contact with the legal system. But the truth is, there's like a very lack of resources, right? The state is not pushing down millions of dollars for reentry funds. You're seeing like smaller reentry groups within the state, probably buried up under the basement of a church, or out somebody's backyard, right? But these are not the state-of-the-art resources that you can imagine to have. And the reason I'm bringing up reentry resources is because we're talking about folks that are being counted within gerrymandering lines, right, within county lines. However, that body count is not going back into its respected area, right? So here's counties where prisons are sitting in, for example, in Adrian, Michigan, right? I'm can't really remember how big their population is, nowhere near Wayne County, right? But they have like 2, maybe 3 prisons that's in Adrian with a very large population. And so these bodies are being counted, and resources that can potentially come from these individual locked up bodies are going into counties where these folks will probably never, ever be paroled to and go out and live in, right? So it's not only an impact on the people that's outside of prison, but it's also an impact on many of the folks that's on the inside, right? Like Anthony just spoke about going up north, being in Ojibwe. We have a prison here in Michigan that's so far up north that's it's in a different time zone, right? We often call that just getting lost out there. Once you go across that bridge, it's really hard to track where a person is at. And Didi spoke about that. the difficulty of going to visit a loved one up there, right? And let's just call BS on our government, right? We make it very difficult and spread our folks everywhere. However, we're still taking that monetized dollar from these individuals that's being locked up. So it's like that taxation without proper representation thing that's going on. And it's not only just hitting the folks on the outside, all of you taxpayers understand where your dollars are going, and these bodies that's, in these counties where that resources is going as well.
Thank you very much for that, Nicholas. And I will say that I have often referred to prison gerrymandering as something similar or worse than the 3/5 compromise, where folks were counted, but they didn't count. They didn't count for, they were counted for the sake of gaining power, but they themselves had no power. They didn't even have the power to vote. And so with that, I'm gonna ask my next question to Alex. Alex, do the resources lost include actual money?
Only indirectly. So unlike a lot of census counts issues, the way prison gerrymandering works is that the kind of funding formulas that are used for distribution of funds, where we usually talk about, get out the count, make sure everybody's counted so you get the resources for your community. Those funds are based on funding formulas that use total population in very limited ways. Most of these funds are very targeted. So, and unfortunately, they actually just cut out incarcerated people altogether from a lot of these funding formulas. So in that kind of perverse way, counting incarcerated people in the wrong place in the census doesn't impact funding formulas, because incarcerated people just aren't included in the kind of census products and surveys that those funding formulas rely on. That said, where you do get a huge impact on resources is in terms of legislative priorities. When you have a legislature that doesn't properly account for people living in their own districts, you get a skew of legislative priorities toward other areas. And what you're then missing is any kind of funding that flows through a proper representative channels. You get kind of left behind when you don't have the proper representation in your legislature.
Can I add on to that, Charles?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, Alex hit the nail on the head. Our representatives have to make decisions. I mean, we in Michigan, our representatives have just finished up the appropriations process, right? Or the first step of it, where they decided where the money is going to go. They advocate for their communities in that process and every other one while they're in office. And, when there's an imbalance in representation, then, communities don't get what they need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And something I'll add to that before the next question is, if you dig deep enough, what you will find are municipalities where nothing existed by way of commerce, or very little. I want to say nothing. And you build a prison, and all of a sudden you have jobs, and you have a tax base that's built up. And that, even though it is indirect, when it comes to how these funds are generated, as when I say indirect, I'm talking about it doesn't necessarily go from hand to hand from a legislator directly to a municipality. But if you build a prison in a space where there is nothing, you have all of a sudden created an economy based upon that prison, that institution, that facility being built. And so again, that's what we have to look at when it comes to how intentional some of this is. It is the intentionality that's involved. And something that Alex said, and then I'll move on because I don't want to be the one that cost us going over time. But when it comes to how they're counted for the purposes of funding. She said it's like they don't count, they disappear, they're not there. And so again, there are these additional harms that just go along with the system itself. And some of them are unknown, some of them are invisible, but I just want to harken back to something that Nicholas said, and that is that these situations are engineered. None of it's by accident. These are you engineer environments, you engineer communities by the way that you move commerce. And I'll just give this example and I'll move on. When the Big Three decides, and this is no indictment on them, I want to be very clear, but when they decide to move the plants outside of Detroit, then you see the collapsing of the tax base. And this is part of that engineering that collapses the economy of a city. These things are intentional. They're intentional. And I think we need to kind of focus in on and understand that. With that, now, my next question is to Nick again. How has gerrymandering impacted the lack of representation for Wayne County and the dilution of power? It just really gets to how is power diluted based upon gerrymandering?
Yeah, and I think, as I was just saying in my previous statement, looking at the number of people, right, that are coming out of Wayne County into our carceral system, and then coming back, and that lack of representation, right? I think that's a clear example right then and there to show, this dynamic within the power structure in our local government, but also in our state government, right? I think another component to that is, I don't often like to talk about, the opening of prisons or prisons remaining open. However, like there were a few prisons in Detroit. I want to say there were two, right? And the population of those prisons, I want to say they probably averaged out, if combined, to about a good 4,000 to 5,000 people total on both yards, right? And I think as we talk about the shutting down of the Big Three, and seeing how, that had an impact on the community, poverty, drugs, everything else started to become on a rise. Ironically or ideally, right, like the closing of these prisons inside of Detroit, ideally, and Wayne County starts to take away a lot of that counting and resources as well, right? So yeah, the prisons did supply employment for folks, correctional officers, but however, I'm looking at like the economy abroad from just folks that are being staffed within the prison, and how, that prison had a potential to probably bring more resources to an impacted community, where folks are being taken away from and locked up in.
Thank you, Nick. I don't know why I muted myself. You all excuse me for the pregnant pause. But yeah, that is absolutely, again, part of the picture. And that's why I say from the beginning, we have to understand that it's prison gerrymandering, but it affects everyone, because Kim has spoken to it as well. There is the dilution of power. The less people that you have in your space that are counted and part of map drawing, the more extended that map becomes. And so where you might have a representative that's just advocating for your issues in a certain municipality because there aren't the people there to for them to maintain that space in that one municipality, now all of a sudden they have to start advocating for several different municipalities. And I'm not necessarily saying that's the worst thing, but I will say that it is something that should not happen at the expense of any citizen. Every citizen should count, and they should count where it is that they reside. Where is your home place of residence? That's where you should be counted. And that's what we're working to bring about and put an end to when we say prison gerrymandering. I do have a question for Rep. Young. I see she's in the space, but I'm going to pass that question up and then come back to it so that she can have a chance to get comfortable with the conversation. And the next question is for Alex. Why do you believe it's necessary for us to address this on a state level?
So obviously the Census Bureau kind of created this problem. So they're the agency that ought to be fixing it. But I don't think you should count on that. They are a slow moving organization. And while they've taken several steps to help end prison gerrymandering, I don't think it's worth counting on the Census Bureau to change their tune by 2030. So in order for the state to end prison gerrymandering, it really just does become a stopgap measure, because there are some things that the state can't fix, like folks counted across state lines. Like your state jurisdiction just stops at the state line. For example, folks who are counted in Bureau of Prisons facilities, the Bureau of Prisons refuses to share address data to the states. So there's some folks, no matter how hard the state tries, it just doesn't have the ability to fix the problem as well as the Census Bureau can in the first place. And states have ended prison gerrymandering for various reasons. Some are racial justice reasons, because incarcerated folks are disproportionately coming from Black and Brown communities in this country. Some of it is just basic principles of equality. Like Washington State, for example, had no district that was even more than 2% incarcerated. So they, on a national level, it looked like, well, they don't even have a prison gerrymandering problem if you look at some of the other states. But to them, exact equality in redistricting was important. So they just took a principled stand on it. Some places like Michigan already address prison gerrymandering at the local level. The state has laws on the books for cities and counties. They're not allowed to count folks who are incarcerated in their town that come from elsewhere. They're not allowed to be counted toward the city council there. So there are these kind of different approaches that are already on the books, and the reasons why state might choose to end prison gerrymandering kind of vary among them, and all the approaches kind of vary. But yeah, by 2030, it's important that the states have a plan in place for two reasons. One, if the Census Bureau is going to continue counting incarcerated people in the wrong place, you want to make sure that you start as early as possible as a state to gather your address data, to get the mapping software in place to make sure that everybody knows how to adjust the redistricting data, so you have a smooth redistricting process, so that nobody comes and says, oh, ending prison gerrymandering gummed up the works in our redistricting. And two, this Census Bureau is responsive to the needs of the states and is required to give the states useful redistricting data. The more states that reject the data that the Census Bureau puts out, that reject counting incarcerated people at the location of the prison, the more pressure there is on the Census Bureau to change the way that they do things, the way that they publish their data. So simply by, adding yourselves as another state that's going to reject the Census Bureau count will put more pressure on the Census Bureau to do the right thing in 2030.
Well, and thank you, Alex. And I'm going to just add a little bit more pressure to the situation. And that pressure is to say, just to be frank, right now we have a legislature that is friendly to this issue. But that is now. And so if we're going to make the change, we need to be about the business of making it happen now, why we have a legislature that's willing to address the issue, take it up, and is friendly to the idea of ending prison gerrymandering. With that, my next question is for Rep. Young, and that is, how have the updated map drawings impacted your constituents now that the maps look totally different?
Okay.
Can we get
Can you all hear me? Okay.
Yes, can we get Rep. Boyd on the screen? Is that possible? Or
Okay. Oh,
I'm sorry, Rep. Young, I apologize. Rep. Young on the screen.
We need a video to do that.
okay. I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying to figure it. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
While we figure it out, don't let that clog up the works with the answer to the question.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So good evening, everybody. I got a couple of minutes. Shawana was like, can you hop on? You might hear some background noise. Apologies. But I just want you guys to know, because people who get an opportunity to get to know me, I'm a freshman. I'm a second year legislator. It feels like I'm a freshman because of redistricting. Because redistricting, everything changed, right? I started with a district that was 100% Detroit, and now I have a district that's less than 45% of Detroit. It now is, it includes parts of southeastern Livonia and South Redford Township. And so those things there was a shock initially to the system when we saw those new lines, but you know, when you're about the business of the people, you honestly don't care who the people are. So I just know how to get things done. And when I met Shawana, so this is the transparency piece, I was not aware of prison gerrymandering. I just gotta tell you the truth. It was really on my radar. When you become a legislator, so many things are brought to light because people start lobbying, and that's how you learn. That's one of the most fascinating things about this job. My son told me just the other day, he was like, Ma, you get into more stuff, because we were talking about a gentleman who wants to have a bill regarding roadkill. Like, whoever thought we need legislation around roadkill? Well, I didn't know we needed legislation necessarily to address this issue. But once I heard about it, I was all in. And so what I'm doing now is really learning more about what it means and how we can correct it. We know that there are some changes, significant changes that need to happen at the federal level with the census, but doing our part here and then work with you all who have been in this space. Now, I count on you. I tell folks, use me up. We get 2 good years at a time. So in those 2 good years, I'm here to do all that I can to move the needle to make things better for us, for our communities. When we think about the fact that in Detroit, we have our own prison systems, and now we have families that are totally broken because they can't get to their people. And that doesn't help you rehabilitate. It just doesn't when they send you hundreds of miles away. And so, I don't know, those are just my few comments, because I know I'm Janie come lately on this meeting. But if there's something specifically that you want me to try to address, I'm here to do it. Sorry that you guys can't see me. I don't know what's going on with that. I'm just glad to be able to speak and for you all to be able to hear me.
Thank you, Rep. Young. And yeah, I heard you say that your time is limited, and we're at the point now where we're going to go to any audience questions. So what I'm going to do before we deal with any questions in the chat, if there are any questions on this subject for Rep. Young that anyone has, I will move you to the front of the line and allow you to ask your question. That means the panel did an excellent job.
Well,
So,
the questions should go in the chat.
yes,
Correct,
well, I'm in the chat now, so I'm gonna read off the questions that I see, and if I miss anything, Ruth is there to help me. So the first question that I see is from John Leon, and it is, I don't understand the political connection of a person being sent to a different prison what it has to do with gerrymandering. Is there anybody that wants to take that question on?
I can address that. So, you know, the way the districts are drawn creates political alliances within the legislature. We saw in New York, the representatives that had a lot of districts upstate, they coalesced around incarceration issues and knocked down any reform laws that came through the legislature. Same thing happened kind of in Rhode Island. The old Speaker of the House would kill any legislation that would come up because he had a prison in his district, and he thought that keeping that prison full benefited him because he had fewer actual constituents that he needed to represent. And so that's how there's pressure to keep prisons full through prison gerrymandering. And so then, you end up with folks far away from home.
Can I also I want to sprinkle a little bit of pepper on there if I can. Because I think, a big part of this conversation, which is missing, is the impact on the incarcerated individual themselves, right? I think last year, the year before, there was a documentary, Michigan Liberation, back, and many other organizations had an opportunity to participate in a documentary. And you hear the stories from folks that were incarcerated, like Danny, right? That would speak on when this counting opportunity happened on the inside, right? Many of us that was locked up, we didn't know what that was. However, right, I've heard stories where people, if you refuse to sign it, right, there can be detrimental repercussions that can come from the administrative side, right? Folks can spend a significant amount of time in solitary confinement. They can receive some type of ticket to take away some form of credit or put them on top lock. However, people were being punished, right? From stories that we've heard on folks on the inside, punitive punishment for not allowing, right, the staff or the administration to count them within those lines. And like I said, for many of us, we didn't know what it was. Danny shared a story in that documentary of the first time when he seen that census count and started to ask people down, the wing, which is the hallway of the prison, what is this? And it couldn't really get a specific answer around, what we were actually putting our names to. So just want to keep in mind, right, that when we talk about this impact, I think some of it is invisible until we can really open up our eyes and see it in our community. But there are people that are inside of our prison systems that will receive some type of punitive punishment because if they refuse to partake in this discount.
Thank you, Nicholas. And I'm going to ask a question myself. I know Angela texted me a question, and I'm going to get that question out. But the ugliness of the picture that Nicholas just touched upon is, if I understand the laws correctly, you have to be counted. I mean, and so it's like, you make me be counted. If I don't, you punish me. And if I do, I'm punished because you're counting me where I'm not supposed to be counted. And I think that's correct. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's, again, it's just harm after harm after harm after harm. I'm already dealing with the harm of being a victim of the system. And then it's just layer after layer after layer of harm that is imputed upon these citizens. And I always use the term dehumanization. It's like, can we just be human? Can we be human towards each other? And it's as if in many of these facilities, you have people who are running them that feel as if that once somebody is under their charge, then they're no longer human. And that is some of what I want us to get the sense of that as we go into this conversation. With that, Angela texted me a question for you, Rep. Young. She said I could probably ask it more eloquently. I doubt it. I'm going to read it just like she texted. She said, "Can you tell about the pending legislation that is moving through the legislature right now on prison gerrymandering? Can you talk to us about that?"
Yeah,
We can hear
what
you.
is that? Oh, okay. Well, currently I don't have any legislation moving through I don't have legislation moving through the legislature right now. So let's just start there. I do believe that Senator Sylvia Santana was working on something. So both of us have been working on something. But for me, it's important for me to work with people who have lived experiences, who have the background in this. So I have joined forces with Shawana Vaughn on this issue, and she has been helping me and my team look at the best way to introduce legislation. So we're working on legislation, but it has not been introduced. We don't have a bill yet that is vetted through my policy team. So that's what we're working on right now. I know I quickly glanced at something that came across the chat, and it talks about working across the aisle. So I'm somebody that works across the aisle within the minority. I had 2 bills signed into law. So if you know anything about being a minority, that's not an easy thing to do as a freshman first getting here and give law. I just know how to work with people. And I continue to do that. And that's what I will be doing. So I'll be shopping the legislation around to everybody. Because right now, there is, I won't say there's an assault, but there is an attempt to undermine good work in the criminal justice space. It's just been this attempt to undermine it with all the good work that we've done. It looks like it's trying to be unwound. And we don't want that to happen with this. And when we introduce it, we want it to be as close as we can get it to perfect, so that we have less opposition. We always know there's going to be somebody that is not going to agree, but that doesn't mean we stop the fight. So that right now, so the quick answer, the simple answer was there's no legislation moving through the legislature right now, but we are working to draft it.
Thank you, Rep. Young. And
Yeah.
if I could just ask a quick follow-up question, and then we'll continue with what I see in the chat. What can we do? We do have a call to action at the end where we're going to ask all the participants to make contact with their legislators. But is there anything else we can do to assist the process from our side of the table when it comes to crafting what is presented to make it so that it sees as little delay as possible?
Mm-hmm. The best thing you do starts with education. That's where I had to start. I had to start with the education on what this is and how it impacts all of us. Since I've been on this call, that's what I heard. Like this is an issue that impacts all of us, whether you know it or not. And that's what's important, making people see how it would personally impact them, how it impact their communities that they represent. That's always paramount. In addition to that, I'm really huge on, I call them testimonies. We know areas where we have seen the negative impacts of prison gerrymandering, then we want to have narrative information available. People will forget stats and numbers and figures, but they hardly ever forget a story. They hardly ever forget when something happened to somebody. So I always encourage people, in addition to your one-pagers, with all your information, with your stats, with your background, we need that. But then drive it home with a way that shows, you know, because of this, X happened, and we cannot allow X to continue to happen.
Thank you, Rep. Young. I do have a question. I'm going to formulate it as best I can.
And I have about 2 minutes. I gotta take off to get to a meeting. Sorry, guys. I didn't know this wasn't on my calendar, so I'm sorry.
Okay, I think we've already asked the question about the bill itself, and I don't see any other questions in the chat directly for you. Okay. Is there anyone else that has a question for Rep. Young before she has to leave? Well, thank you, Representative Young. We do appreciate you coming into the meeting and engaging in this conversation and giving us information from the legislature on where things stand. And we will definitely be in touch very, very, very soon.
Please, please.
Absolutely.
Looking forward to continuing to work with you all. Bless you all. Have a good evening now.
You too.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to continue on with what I see in the comments very quickly. This is a statement. It says, is there any anti-gerrymandering legislation in the works? And are there any state reps or state house senators who could be, I can't see what's behind that. Somebody put an emoji over it. As good candidate, I guess seen as good candidates for co-sponsoring any legislation. I guess that really should have been to Rep. Young. I apologize, Timothy, for not getting that out, but we will get the answer to that question to you at some point after the session. Next thing I see is a question, not sure if it has been covered. Do all states count prisoners in the districts where the prisons are instead of their last address? I'm going to ask Alex to tackle that because she's done a lot of work with getting prison gerrymandering passed or ended. And let me phrase that correctly. Putting an end to prison gerrymandering in several other states.
So nope. A lot of states don't count incarcerated people at the location of the prison. We've had over a dozen states in the last redistricting cycle that went through the process to count everybody at home. And there are more states on the way toward 2030. Illinois, for example, has their legislation that'll come into effect for the 2030 cycle. And there's been essentially two different approaches taken so far. Some states have passed legislation, like right now, I think Michigan has Senator Santana's bill introduced. And so the process through that is you pass your legislation, and then you collect the home addresses, you adjust your data, and you redistrict with that data. And so you kind of know what's coming up, you have time to prepare. The other way that has happened is through kind of independent action through the committees and commissions that do redistricting themselves. So we had one of the most recent examples of that was in Montana. And this is where, you know, we're talking about working across the aisle and this being a fairly, what should be a nonpartisan issue. In Montana, it was actually at the behest of the Republican contingent of the redistricting commission that they thought that this was the fair way to do it, was to count everybody at home. And so they took independent action, got some consultants in to do the work of adjusting the redistricting data to count folks at home, and then went to the legislature to ask them for legislation to have something in place for 2030. So yeah, we're up to about, depends how you count it, 14, 15-ish states doing some sort of work on the books or through the commissions independently. And it accounts for almost 50% of people who live in the US right now. So momentum's definitely growing.
Thank you, Alex. And I have another question I want to put to Kim, and then again, if there's anyone else that has any questions before we get to our call to action, you know, please put them in the chat. But Kim, if you, and I'm hitting you with this out of nowhere, I know, but can you just talk about some of the things that we are looking for when it comes to the issues of prison gerrymandering, what we're looking at as far as putting into language that we want to present to the legislature and anybody else as well. But I'll start with Kim. Some of the language, some of the things that we're looking for to have done in order to end prison gerrymandering in Michigan.
Yeah, well, with the help of Alex from Prison Policy Initiative and Campaign Legal Center, you know, we've have a draft of Senator Santana's bill that would require the prisons to record their incarcerated people's addresses and then give those to the Secretary of State's office before every census or during the census count period. And then, the people who are incarcerated would be counted in, at their home address rather than in the prison. Alex, do you have anything to add to that?
I think you covered the basics. You can kind of go down the rabbit hole of the minutia, but yeah, basically collect the addresses, give it to Secretary of State's office. They adjust the data so that you get a copy of the census data that you can use for redistricting that counts everybody at home, and you're ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty straightforward. Right now, though, I mean, not all of the prisons are actually collecting, the addresses for the people who are being held there. So, I mean, this does need to be implemented with enough time for everybody to develop the systems that are necessary to make it happen. So I think it's probably, it's important that this happens in this cycle so that there's no reason for people to not be counted in their, at their actual homes during the next census.
Yes, and I want to say, I know it's hard to believe, it was for me. It's hard to believe that you have this intake and you don't have a record of home addresses. I just don't know why that would be or how it would be possible. I mean, you're intaking a person, a citizen. And how can you do intake and you don't intake their personal information, including their address? That database does not currently exist. And so that's what somewhat complicates the problem right now as we have it, because that database has to be created. But it's been done. It's been done. It's been done, as Alex has said, in other states. And so there's no reason why we cannot do it. There's no reason. It just takes legislation and the will. And I don't know which comes first, but the will to do it and the legislation that kind of forces the hands of, well, some people who really don't want to do it, just to be frank. With that, do we have any other questions? I'm going to get to the call to action. We want everybody to be a part of this change. We do. And so what we are going to be asking everyone to do is to make contact with their legislator, make contact with your representative, make contact with your state senator. And I'm even going to say make contact with your senators on the federal level and your, y'all know what they are. Y'all tell me what they are. You have the senators and you have the, y'all know what they are. They work in the House down in Washington. Make contact with them. But we are going to give you the information so that you can, well, we're going to make it easy for you. In the chat, Angela is going to put in the chat our call to action. And what will be there, if you will take advantage of it, is language that we've already developed. And all you have to do is cut and paste it, put your name in it, and look up your representative and send it to them. Send it to them. And you have the ability to modify it. You also have the ability to create your own letter and send it to your representative. But we need to flood the system with communication, demanding that our representatives support the ending of prison gerrymandering. It just needs to be put to an end. It does. There are the other impacts and the personal ones that Anthony and Dee Dee have shared. And, you know, I'm not really sure how we attack that right now. But that needs to be addressed at some point too. It does, to where you're not placing these additional harms on citizens and their families. And but for now, this is what we're asking everyone to do. Angela, is that in the chat? Is that available? You're muted. Oh, I see the yes. Okay. So if you click on the link in the chat, that will open up, I believe it's a Google form, and it will allow you to, again, just cut it, put your personal information in there and paste it and send it to your representative, or create your own letter. As Rep. Young said, it's always good to have a personal story if you are personally impacted, and all of us are, but some to greater extents than others. So Dee Dee, what you have to say is vitally important to this cause. Anthony, Nick, what you all have to say, Nicholas, I apologize, but what you all have to say on this issue is vitally important, because you know the experience personally. You know it from both sides of the table. And so we need to get about the business of getting this done. There's an election in 2024, and that means two things. One is that the tables can turn and we could wind up with a legislature that's not friendly to this issue. That's the bad news. The good news is that this is the time to force their hands. This is the time to force their hands. We hire, we fire. That's what I tell people about elections. We hire, we fire. These are the things that we want done. And if you do not do them, in the next cycle, we plan on doing the work to get you fired. Just that simple. So now is the time to force the hands of those that we have hired. We hired them when we cast our ballot. And we hired them beyond just a simple casting of our ballot when we went out and we knocked doors. And we did all the other things. I know we did a lot of work. We did a lot of work to put people in place that are friendly to ending some of the ills that are associated with the criminal legal system. And a lot of work is being done, but we don't want any of it to get lost in the shuffle. So if you could do that, make that contact, we greatly appreciate it. And I'm going to open the floor to the panel. Do any of you have any final comments before I turn it back over to Jennifer to close us out? We actually have 20 minutes. We're well ahead of time, but that, you know, I'm going to say we're going to go with the funeral type of statements. 3 minutes, please. Y'all, some of y'all know what I'm talking about. Y'all. Anyway, anyone have any final comments that they'd like to share before we log off? That means y'all did a good job. You all have educated us and obviously have informed each other so that you know, we're ready to go. If there are no questions, that means everybody, as Barack would say, is fired up and ready to go, right? Fired up and ready to go. Ready to go. Okay.
I guess I could slide in there. I don't want to just leave us in that complete silence. So like, it's just
Thank you.
Over with.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess the best way to end this is just to say how to get more involved with the work around ending prison gerrymandering and more specifically ending mass incarceration in Michigan. It's a plethora of organizations that's here and a plethora of organizations that's in our community that's doing this work. More, you can get in touch with Michigan Liberation on all social media platforms. Through our website, there is somebody that will always answer our @info Gmail. I know that's kind of like cliche to say. And then outside of just the conversation around prison gerrymandering, we're going into our 4th year of a Michigan Black Moms Bailout. So if folks want to learn more about what the Michigan Black Moms Bailout is, Google it. I know that's cliche to say as well, but we are in those times and days where we can tell people to Google our information. Look us up on our social media platforms as well. And our goal with the bailout is to really expose the harmful conditions of the bail industry and Black and brown communities. But more specifically, there's a major increase of women that are being incarcerated, mainly in our county jails, but also in our prison systems. And so we use these type of campaigns to really highlight the harms that are happening with women in the legal system and the harms of our bail system as well. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you for that, Nicholas. And let me say that that's another campaign that I'm working on with the ACLU, and that's bail reform. And again, the more you look into the system, the more we see that it needs work, and that's about the best way I can put it, the most polite way. It's a shame when people are incarcerated just because they can't afford bail, and you wind up losing your job, and your family falls apart, and you're sitting in a jail for over 18 months. There's legislation talking about reducing it to 18 months, and the Constitution, well, let me not go down that road. I'll leave it alone. But that bail reform is another one of those issues that we need to deal with. There is a lobby day or Capitol Day, depending on who meetings you're sitting in on, that is taking place on the 24th of this month. There are buses that are going to be going to Lansing. Join in, get with Michigan Voices, Michigan Liberations, VAC, Michigan United, Moses. These are all organizations are in conversation about getting up to Lansing, and it'll be your chance to personally participate and speak on these issues in front of your legislators. Somebody asked the question, do we want to ask to support Santana's bill? And I'm going to field that at the risk of stepping out of line, but this is what I will say. As it stands right now, what we are suggesting is that there needs to be additions to that bill. And so what we are saying is that when you make contact with your legislator, simply ask that they commit to putting an end to prison gerrymandering. We don't have a bill that we feel like is complete enough to say it should be supported. That is the general consensus in the meetings that I've been a part of. And so that's what we're asking. Let's just simply start with that. Tell your legislator that you want them to be involved in putting an end to prison gerrymandering, and we'll figure out the bill as we go along. As Rep. Young said, she doesn't have one yet. There is one in the hands of Senator Santana, but that is the one that we're looking at and looking to supplement that with some additional language. Is there anything else?
I would just encourage everyone as well. This may not be something that affects you personally, but let's not wait for it to affect you in the future, or a loved one or a family member. So at this point, the least we can all do that costs $0 is spread awareness. So if you can continue these conversations, make sure that you're talking about these things to individuals that may not be aware of it, it's also very helpful too.
Thank you, Dee Dee, for sure. And we are just very, very, very happy that you were in this space and that you shared some of your story. To know that we have been graced with Breonna Taylor's sister in this space to tell her story. It's really fantastic. And I know everyone in the space knows the story, and our heart is still with your family. Well, we want to do what it takes to, help, kind of assuage some of the trauma that you've already gone through by helping to deal with some of these issues. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Angela, before I turn it over to Jennifer, did you have anything you wanted to say on behalf of VAC?
I just wanted to say that we have been meeting bi-weekly for a few months now, and thank you for your support of this work, the organization, everyone that's here tonight. We don't want to just survive, we need to thrive, and by coming together, all of these issues are intertwined. So that's why this work is so important. Support these organizations. You want to know what you can do, you can get involved, and it can start with just a small step of just coming to a meeting like this. So thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you, Angela. And before I turn over to Jennifer again, my overwhelming, effervescing thanks for allowing us this space. I know that we just got in touch with the league and the library last month and said, hey, we have this issue and it's pressing. Will you allow us to jump the line in front of other people who have come with subjects that they want the Detroit Public Library and the League of Women Voters to give this type of exposure, and you let us jump the line and allowed us to bring this issue because of how relevant and pertinent it is right now. And so my thanks on behalf of VAC and all of the members of this coalition. And with that, I'm going to turn over to you, Jennifer.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to all of the panelists. Really appreciate it. There's been a lot of information posted in the chat. If you couldn't capture it, some of it was in the email that you should have received from after registering on Eventbrite. If you need any more information, I will be happy to try to track it down for you, but VAC is the primary organization here, I would say. There are certainly other organizations. We will, our program should be on YouTube, although we have some paperwork we need to take care of before we can post that, before we can post this. The panelists will be told, but this is the YouTube link. This is for the special channel for the League of Women Voters program. And we will be meeting on June 13th with Eric Walcott of MSU Extension. He's going to explore the issues from last November's ballot as the political landscape continues to shift, which we know it's going to keep doing. So here is a link to that. Because the marketing has made some changes, I'd recommend that you get in touch with me if you want to be kept informed of programs, because I'm not sure how it works, but I think marketing is notifying people of all of the Detroit Public Library programs, which doesn't seem useful. So if you have any questions, get in touch with me. Thank you, Angela, point person. Charles is the one who connected us. And we really appreciate the chance to talk about this issue, which is an important one that a lot of us didn't know about. Okay, well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you again. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye.